Welcome, everyone. I'm Fabio Rivera, Program and Events Coordinator at the p.g.a, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this Q&A today with All Quiet on the Western Front's director, co-writer, and producer, Edward Berger, and producer, Malte Grunert. Before we get started, we'd like to say a quick thank you to Netflix for making today's panel possible. Leading this conversation today is Pete Hammond, Deadline's chief film critic and awards columnist for over 11 years. Pete is the two-time recipient of the Publicists Guild's Press Awards and a 5-time Emmy nominee for writing. Pete, thank you for being here, and I'll turn this over to you.
All right, thanks a lot, and welcome, Edward and Malte. We're very happy to have this conversation now. All Quiet on the Western Front. It's a very famous name, very famous book, very famous film in the early days of movies. Talkies, I should say, at least talking movies, Oscar winner. And I believe it was remade for television at one time with Richard Thomas, but it hasn't been for generations a new version in a long time. So Edward and Malte, let me ask you, first of all, what was the inspiration for now at this period in history to bring this to the screen, particularly from a German point of view, which is the first time ever we've seen this done on film? Edward, go ahead.
Oh, okay, it's me. Okay, I wanted to hand this to Malte, but then I'm gonna start. Well, I got a call from Malte about 3 years ago. He was basically heading out of the publisher's office and calling me and asking me if I would be interested in readapting and directing, basically making All Quiet on the Western Front with him. And I suddenly thought, oh God, why hadn't I thought of that before? And it seemed like a blind spot sitting there waiting to be mined, because it is the most famous German novel, the best-selling novel of all times in the German language. I think it sold like 40 million copies, and we for some reason never made it. And now seemed like the right time, because or Malte can get into, but why now? There was a big reason for us. We had a long discussion about it, but for my sense, I thought that we, Malte and I, or the German perspective, German filmmakers, could bring something to it that no other country possibly could, because we do have a different history than England or America. There is especially when it comes to both wars, they're laden with, for us, they're laden with guilt and shame and horror and a sense of responsibility towards that history. And we thought, if we imbue our film with that sense, because we are born that way, we have that DNA, which English or American filmmakers don't have, they will make a very different film. So we thought we might be able to add something to this conversation when making a film about war, about the First World War from our perspective. And then I had long conversations with Malte, is now the right time to make it? And he had some convincing arguments for me.
Yeah, Malte, tell me, producers love to know how you get the rights, how you make this happen. And in this case, such an older property. So was there any difficulty here for you as a producer in making this happen?
Well, the novel had always been one thing that I was aware of. Obviously, I'd written it in my teens, read it again in my 20s. It had always been an important book. But about 3.5 years ago, I came across a script by Ian Stokell and Leslie Patterson, who had written a draft, and for one reason or another, they had actually managed to secure an option from the Remarque estate, which is handled by the NYU, for a really long period of time, and they hadn't managed to get the film off the ground. One of the reasons I suspect is that their draft, while functioning in many aspects, didn't have this particular German perspective, and they were also intending to do it in the English language. So when I saw that draft, I thought, like Edward, well, this is a blind spot really, and it has to be made in its original language because it had never been done, and it needs to be done from that particular perspective. And then we teamed up with Ian and Leslie. Edward took on their script and brought it back much closer to the novel, and also brought into the script the German perspective, and obviously changed the language, which then turned it into a viable project.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Edward, in taking their draft and putting all of the rest of the book and being more faithful to the novel, how important was that for you to go right back to that book and make it that authentic, at least to the Remarque novel?
It's more of a tonal thing, and also respect to that original basic IP, the original vision. But also I felt the main thing is what's the book about? You know, what's at the heart of the book? What's the essence of it? And I felt that it's about a bunch of young kids who get manipulated by some populists, populist politicians, populist teachers, who tell them war is an adventure, and they go into the trenches with enthusiasm and innocence and youth, and within a week or within a day of their existence there, everything is destroyed. Their first comrade dies, their hopes are destroyed, their everything and they become beasts of survival, animals, kind of just. And if surviving means you have to kill the other person, they're going to do it. And they turn into these machines, into these killing machines, who lose their souls and who have to shut off all their emotions in order to survive, in order to stay sane. And unfortunately, not many of them survive in the end, and so that's also the essence of the book. And so for me, it was very important to bring that in, and also to bring that, just our sensibility, that I felt that was the reason, like Malte said, the movie never got made. It just needed to be a German movie. And that's interesting, by the way, because 3 years ago, any financier would have told Malte and me, can you please shoot it in English version? Or can you make this in English? Yeah. And now it was the opposite. I mean, there were still some old-fashioned financiers who thought, like, can we make like 2 versions, one in English, or we dub one or something? And we always said, no, this is a German movie, because otherwise, 2 English ones were already made. Like, why there's no reason to make it. And so Netflix was then the partner who said, we said, we want to make this in German. And they said, we need a movie like this in German. This has to be in German, And a bunch of other distributors or financiers would have done it too. But it's so interesting how that shifted, how this, like Malte called it, a viable project. 5 years ago, it wouldn't have been, because it's too expensive to be a German language movie, while the budget is still quite low.
So even 5 years ago, Malte, that's really interesting to me. That, I mean, since this script has been around and they've been trying to make it and different ways there, but weren't aware of the financial considerations or things that have changed to make this possible now at this time.
Possibly. I mean, so that's for them to answer, and and they're they're writers. I'm the producer, so it's better if I know what the financial framework or the viability framework of this needs to be. And I think it's also, obviously they had been working on this for a really long time, and what Edward said about the German perspective and everything. From a German perspective, a war film can't be a hero's journey, and the death of an enemy can't be a good thing. It's just another death. And that really is the essence of Remarque, which is what Edward brought his draft closer to again. So it is Remarque wrote, he didn't write a war novel in the sense of, some young guys, and we need to be at that point by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, or this and that will happen. or we need to save someone sort of behind enemy lines. It's really all about young men going into war, being sort of, sort of being brainwashed by populist propaganda, very much like we see it today.
Yeah.
Sort of it is sort of, there are right-wing parties on the rise. There's a neo-fascist party in the government in Italy. There is a right-wing party with sort of considerable percentage and seats in parliament in Germany. Hungary, you have in the Netherlands and France, and this kind of hate speech and nationalist, populist sort of hatred has entered the political discourse again. And that's also one of the reasons why Edward and I felt it was a timely film to remind us, sort of among this new quality of sort of political discourse, to remind ourselves that war is not an adventure, but war can be the result of this kind of political speech that we experience more and more.
Not to mention another war going on in Europe right now with Ukraine. Probably when you ventured into, well, obviously when you ventured into this, that wasn't going on, but that's made it even more timely and front of mind now, Edward. This does seem to be the right moment in time that you either luckily happened onto or, got it made and got it out there.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not an actuality, a relevance that we're hoping for or vying for. And the images that you now see in the Ukraine are shockingly similar to, the ones, they're photographers who put these opposite of each other, the 1914, 1915, 16, 17, 18 images of the trenches and the Ukraine war, and they look the same. They look actually, it's just freezingly cold and muddy, and it's just old-fashioned in a way. It's a bunch of young men in a trench shooting at each other, and it's like a trench warfare. So we were never hoping for that, and it saddens me when I watch the movie or when I show the movie. But as Malte said, 3 years ago when we started it, I felt there was a language on the street that I hadn't noticed before, and this trickled down from parliaments, people shouting at each other, calling each other names. I heard on the street, one should put Angela Merkel up against the wall. You hear that couples, like things like that, you don't say, and they're not normal, and they didn't used to be in German. They used to be like that in German politics in the 30s and 40s.
Right.
That's the last time they spoke like that. And suddenly we heard that speech again, and it scared us. And that's why we made the film.
Yeah, I have to say too, when you're talking about the battlefields and your cinematographer and all of the logistics of shooting these scenes of war, I've told you this before, but I've never seen it quite as realistic and just nerve shattering as what you managed to get on film in this movie. There were scenes here I've never seen with the fire and all of that. Can you talk about just shooting this film and getting it there on screen? And since this is the producers, for a price.
Shooting it was an absolute nightmare. But in hindsight, also, like, it makes us incredibly. I remember the last day on the battlefield when Malte and I walked off and the crew walked off. We were really exhausted, but we were also incredibly proud that we just went through it and we hadn't dropped a shot. We just made it. Yeah. And so basically the only way for James and I and Malte to make it was to really plan it diligently, because we still had a low budget, compared to an international film. This is a tiny movie. So we had, we flew James over to Berlin. He's from England, and this was COVID. So we locked ourselves in a hotel room where there was no room service. And I went home at night, but he stayed in, and I gave him water in the morning and some cookies, and that was it. And then, so we spent 2 or 3 months in this room drawing every shot especially of the battle scenes. The others we really planned diligently and wrote shot lists and floor plans and camera angles and so forth. We knew exactly what we were going to see. So, but in the battle scenes, to be honest, I had never shot a battle scene before. You know, there was one sentence that James said in the first crew meeting. Well, we've all shot battle scenes before, you know, and I raised my hand and said, I've never done it, you know. So, but never even blew up a car before. You know? So, you know, so this was like the first. I mean, I made other things that were complicated, but this was a new challenge for me. So I really wanted that time to plan with James. And we drew literally for 2-3 months, sitting in this room, lying on the floor, reenacting scenes, just the two of us, making up floor plans of trenches and knowing, oh, we're going to need this much stretch. We actually went on a field once and timed the length the trench had to have and the corner we had to go and the little extensions that we needed to hide a camera in or whatever. And then, so we really planned it and then put it up on the wall and looked at the movie again, re-edited it, redrew it because thinking, oh, that doesn't quite work. So we kept drawing and drawing and adding more and more details up to the extent of knowing how many explosions do we need in this shot? How many shots are fired? These are all essential things for the armorers, for the SFX guys to know. And for me, it was always important to do everything that happens, any explosion, any ice on the costume was only there to illustrate to the audience what Paul feels and to put us in his shoes and to kind of experience what he is going through, to give us the most immersive experience and to put what is in his gut on screen and to put the camera what's on screen. And we also had, I do believe it may, you know, take more time, but we only had one camera to be more precise, and we really did everything. We had two cameras, but they were there to leapfrog. Yeah, so we really shot. It was really a single camera approach because we felt only that way we can really control and shape what is in front of the lens, and therefore make it economical in a way. Everything that was left and right of the lens was like not shootable. You know?
Yeah.
And so we really it was planning and talking to the crew a lot and having many Zoom HOD meetings where everyone was able to get their questions in to say how much blood, how many costumes do we need, and cutting things down so that there were, you know, that only the essential things were left that ended up on screen. In the end, I think we cut out maybe a scene and a half or something that didn't work because I didn't properly direct it, but the rest ended up in the movie. Every single shot, sort of when you put the storyboards next to the edits, it's eerily similar. It's basically the same thing, and you can just put it next to each other and see that we really shot what we did and what we had planned, and it sort of then paid off. But it was still a very grueling shoot to get through because every morning I thought we also had many shots that I didn't know how to accomplish, and I asked James, how are we going to accomplish this? Getting out of the trench and climbing over and running with a kid for, you know, that's not a techno crane. That's because you're going to have to get off the techno crane, going around the corner in the trench all in one shot. And he often said, I don't know. We're going to ask the grips, and they're going to have to and the operator, and let's work out those solutions later. You know, let's first get on the page how we want the shot, how we want to design the shot, and then we figure out how to technically achieve it with the crew.
Yeah, it's
and actually, I mean, sort of if I can just quickly add, it really was planning. I mean, sort of we started recceing sort of our locations 3/4 of a year before we ended up before we started production, and sort of we had as Edward said, we had the DP over. I mean, sort of we had half a year before we started production we needed to put an order in with the weavers of the material so that the costume house would end up with enough fabric to actually make all the uniforms we needed. So it was 3/4 of a year of sort of precise planning, because we did shoot the entire film in 52 days,
Wow.
which sort of given the fact that sort of Edward and James at some point, and I do have to say, sort of, I needed to take a breather when they said they wanted to do this one camera only. But sort of, given that the only way to do it was really sort of precise and long planning. And so that's what enabled us to do that.
You mentioned the costumes. I thought it was kind of chilling here to see the aspect of this war where the costumes in the real war were just reused, and they would, oh my gosh, that is just a chilling thought there too, of how that was done. But production design too, Edward, in terms of the trenches and the battlefield and all of that in creating the visual look from that aspect of it. What was that collaboration like with your production designer?
But by the way, we read an article recently that young Russian conscripts are given uniforms of their dead colleagues. So it does happen again too.
Right out of this, what you have in this film, bringing it to life again for people.
Yeah. So same with the production designer Christian Goldbeck. He was on quite early, and very early, and we sat down a lot, and the great thing was about designing these shots in our head is because James and I could just sort of tell him, listen, we want to do this shot, and want to go around the corner to the right with the soldier, and then we want to meet this kid under a bridge, and an explosion goes off, and then he climbs up a ladder, and it's all supposed to be one shot, and so he designed the trenches according to the wish list of the DP and the director, and which gave us really also the exact. We shot every inch of this trench, and sometimes faked it for another one, which also gave us the possibility to really. He designed it with camera traps, with equipment traps, with even down to the fact where I would sit, with the monitor crouched in the corner somewhere, and it was very much based on research. Of course, he did a long time of research and finding the right books and finding the right images, showing them to me, me bringing him images, and then really building these trenches like a bespoke suit in a way, to according to camera and shot needs. Yeah,
that is, I mean, from every aspect of production, the look of this, the sound work, I should comment on too, was really extraordinary as well. And that's so important. And so many people, producers understand it, but so many people, when they go to a movie, they don't really understand what the sound really is and what it's doing here. And that's something to point out. Yeah, Malte definitely agrees with that. I think, yeah, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, sort of it is, we had a conversation the other day with our sound designer Frank Kruse, who said that he was very lucky on this one because there was a lot of original sound, and I also have to give credit to Edward, because a lot of directors I've worked with in the past, they don't care about sound, right? Sort of as soon as the image is right, and sort of the sound recordist says, yeah, sort of, the dialogue was sort of, that was fine. I think that was clear enough. They move on. And we did record just a lot of additional sound on the set of extras running, sort of extras stumbling, screaming, sort of falling into the mud, explosions, whatever, you know, putting together their weapons or climbing a ladder out of the trench. So, so our sound crew was lucky in a sense where that they didn't have to recreate everything, because obviously, you know, on war films, as I hear, I haven't made many, but as I hear, usually the entire sound needs to be recreated because sort of very little can be used from the set. And we were lucky enough to have a good sound library that traveled with us from Prague back to Berlin, where we did our sound post, and he was able to build it up from that. But it is, I mean, sort of, I think they've done an incredibly sort of overwhelming job of something that really puts you in there, and that is an onslaught basically of sound also, but also something that, and that's also something we need to mention that works well with Volker Bertelmann's fantastic score.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of dialogue between sort of our sound department in post and the composer of where to sort of, you know, of how to blend the edges and how to move one into the other, and sort of and where sort of the score becomes sound and the sound sort of becomes the rhythm of the score, and these sort of things.
Yeah. Before we have to go, I must talk about the cast and how you cast this film, Edward, and how you got these actors. Obviously, everybody knows Daniel Bruhl and others, but some of them I didn't know, and I'm curious how you put them together, these young men that you got into this film here.
Well, it all started with Malte again, that he gave me a picture of a young man called Felix Kammerer, Paul Bäumer, who plays our Paul Bäumer now, the main character. And he said, my wife works in the theater in Vienna, in the Burg Theater. It's a big, very big theater in Vienna. And there's this young kid who just started out. And he just came from drama school, and just, why don't you take a look at him? And I looked at the picture and I thought, wow, what a great face. It's transparent, it's old fashioned. It doesn't look modern. It fits the times. He looks studious. He doesn't look like a soldier. He doesn't look like a hero. It comes down to, again, like not telling a hero story. He looks like a normal kid, you know, who doesn't belong in a trench. And so we invited him, and it was his first casting ever. He's never been in front of a lens, in front of a camera. And he was great, but I'm the person who needs sort of reassurance that he's really the best. And to find the best, you can only like look at everyone else, and then you know this is the best person if you can have something to compare to. So we literally invited everyone to come, and we invited Felix back 2 or 3 times, and actually 4 times, I think. So we really put him through the ringer for this. And so on the second time, we put a uniform on him and boots, and then he immediately walked differently and sort of inhabited this uniform. It fit him very well. He had a different gait in these boots. And then he just eventually, like, I think 4 or 5 months later, we called him and said, we would like you to play this film. And this was like that with many of the other kids too. They're out of drama school, or we really wanted someone, because it's such an iconic role, who is innocent for the audience, that they don't associate him with other movies, but only with this movie.
Right.
And also for Felix, I've worked with a couple of kids before in movies. And when kids, and I always wanted new ones that never had made a movie. Because when you, and I found them eventually, but it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of like scratching and thinking like, oh God, we're never going to find anybody. And then eventually you do. But with kids who've been in front of the camera too often, they lose their innocence to the camera, and they become too professional, and it just becomes a little bit boring to watch.
Yeah.
And same with Felix. It was wonderful that he had a total innocence with the camera, and just this youthful enthusiasm. He was really able to play this arc from young innocent man to jaded older killing machine.
Yeah, that was, yeah, definitely. Before we go, also, I want to mention the other producer that you two are working with, Daniel Dreyfus, here. And quickly, Malte, how did that whole production trio work together here from producing point of view?
It's Daniel Dreyfus sort of was attached to the previous draft of the script with Ian and Leslie, but sort of effectively, partly due to COVID, partly due to the fact that, you know, this is a German language production, and we shot it in Prague. He sort of ended up not coming out to the shoot, or sort of while we were prepping or setting it up. So he was there sort of from, you know, in a previous sort of version of the film. And obviously, you know, we honor and credit that. But sort of while we were out there, sort of he didn't have the sort of the chance or opportunity to come out.
Yeah, COVID has made it so difficult in so many ways for producers in every aspect of filmmaking. It's a miracle. I don't know how you guys do it. Make a massive epic war movie in the middle of COVID. It's like hats off to you. And thanks for telling us all about it here today for the Producers Guild and joining us here. And best of luck as the film goes forward. And congratulations on all those award nominations and awards that you're already receiving for this film.
Thank you so much, Pete.
Well,
thanks for the
absolutely.
conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.